in India, as well as the opportunity that that presents and the solution that we are offering. We're going to do 2 deep dive case studies, both into a US and also an India context, to give a little more depth to our concept. And then we're going to talk about feasibility, the challenges that this might face, but also reasons why we think that it may be doable. A little conversation about next steps, what would actually have to happen to get this off the ground, and we'll make sure to leave some time for questions and answers at the end. So without further ado, oh yeah, also we'll have a little bar running across the bottom that helps you to see where you are in the presentation at any given time. So we're going to talk a bit about the problem. This is not something that requires deep academic research. I can say that as one example from my life, my mother had to put an alert on her calendar every afternoon at 3 p.m. and spent time every day for about 2.5 weeks checking a whole list of websites to try to find information about timing and availability in order to get a vaccine scheduled for her and my dad. My mom's pretty privileged. She is smart and pretty technical and is retired, so she has time on her hands. But this kind of thing is much more difficult if you don't have access to the internet or are working 2 jobs or are a single parent or something. I went to get my vaccine. Mine happened to go pretty smoothly. Lyric went the next day to the same place 1 day later, and they just didn't give any information to her about how to get her second dose. So that was just a ball that fell through the cracks. I think I just mixed metaphors there. Jack has some stories that he'll share later about some of his issues trying to find a vaccine appointment. So just in our little circle, we have all these sort of personal anecdotes, but it's not just us. This is an article from The Guardian, hours of scrolling and endless refreshing. So this isn't just limited to our little circle. Here is The Guardian talking about hours of scrolling and endless refreshing. Here's the New York Magazine writing about Stephen Lurie writing about trying to get a leftover dose of the vaccine last night and it didn't go well for him. Maddening red tape facing older people who want the vaccine from the New York Times. Fast Company saying, why can't the government answer this simple question of when can I schedule an appointment? Also, there's a $44 million vaccine data system that the US invested in that has turned out to be basically useless because reasons. And whatever those reasons were, people are now just building their own systems. So this is, it's challenging. There's all these websites and articles about it. You can tune into the news and hear stories about why it's so hard to book vaccine appointments. Perhaps most heartbreaking, all kinds of anecdotes and stories on social media. This email broke my heart. Our vaccine rollout just isn't working. If this is how it's making our seniors feel. This person is talking about the fact that they don't have a computer and they have to stand in line without bathrooms, and that doesn't work when you're 87. But specifically, my doctor has advised no stress or anxiety, and stress and anxiety is currently the only path to the vaccine. We have to be able to find a way to do better. I'm going to hand off to Jack to continue.
One sec, we'll just get this going. Okay, thank you, Jason. So along with the evidence that Jason has shown us, we actually encountered similar pain points in our stakeholder interviews. So one of us interviewed an emergency response planner who discussed call centers being overwhelmed and even vaccine seekers being turned away at the vaccination site. We also talked to public health officials who noted the difficulty of getting vaccines to rural, remote, and undocumented populations. These officials also noted inadequate infrastructure and people's concerns about privacy or even the safety of the vaccine itself. We also talked to a physician assistant who was uncertain about vaccine eligibility and prioritization of groups within her own hospital. And we talked to a medical student working in the ER who spent days searching for a vaccine. And this student struggled through online registration systems that falsely confirmed eligibility and availability of the vaccine. And he ultimately made a 6-hour road trip just to get vaccinated. We also talked to a CIO in higher education who found it difficult to interpret and align policies ranging from the institutional to the federal level. And this person also talked about the need to make difficult decisions regarding the transparency of public health data as well as the difficulty of modifying existing systems or creating new ones to support the vaccination process. So clearly there are many problems with the vaccine rollout. And in this 50-day PIT challenge, there's no way that we could have addressed them all. So after weighing the impact and feasibility of different parts of this larger process, we decided to focus solely on vaccine registration and notification. So as things currently stand, we have defined the problem in the following way. On the administrative side of things, local authorities are struggling with inefficiency of individual counties scrambling to put together their own solutions, despite having many overlapping needs, which is costing them valuable time and money. They're struggling with lack of clear direction from the federal government, leading local authorities to make mistakes or second guess themselves. They're also struggling with insufficient resources that prevent local communities from building secure, private, accessible, and easy to use registration systems. So then on the patient side of things, there are individuals that are struggling with miscommunication, which makes vaccine seekers more likely to act upon incomplete or confusing information. They're also struggling with uncertainty, along with a sense of helplessness or fear that is causing individuals, such as the senior that Jason talked about, unnecessary stress and anxiety. And they're also struggling with lost time that's spent seeking information and trying to register for a vaccine, which especially hurts those that need to balance getting a vaccine with job responsibilities, family life, and other commitments. These problems are pervasive in the current registration process, which leaves us an opportunity for positive change. And this opportunity is that those who want to receive a vaccine have a single simple process to follow in order to register, after which they will be notified with clear next steps when a vaccine becomes available for them. So to answer this opportunity, we propose VAXS, a centralized platform which manages core functions of the registration process, but also allows local public health agencies to add layers of customization as per their own policy and cultural needs. And the ultimate goal of VAXS is to improve the patient experience, providing them clarity and peace of mind in regards to getting the vaccine. So now that we've defined the problem, I'd like to take a look at how VAXS would work in the United States. So first we'll look at VAXS from a systems view, modeling the interactions between major stakeholders. And these stakeholders are the CDC at the federal level, county health officials at the local level, providers administering the vaccine, and then of course, vaccine seekers. So there are three major steps that need to happen before VAXS can be deployed. The first is that the CDC needs to actually build and back VAXS, including the centralized registration website, call center, database, and other core technologies. And part of this phase includes writing least common denominator questions that will be used to determine eligibility, such as age. The next step is that the county adopts this system, and they will need to add additional questions regarding local eligibility requirements and also rules to represent eligibility phases, which together these will determine who is eligible at any given time. And throughout this step, the CDC should provide support to these local counties. And then the final step is that county health officials and vaccine administrators will build a resource for scheduling appointments that will actually connect individuals to vaccines. And VAXS will share this resource alongside notifications that people are eligible. So at the point that VAXS is deployed, the first thing that will happen is that individuals will register for a vaccine via one of the CDC's centralized entry points. And the VAXS system will receive this registration so that public health officials can view it in a de-identified fashion. Then there's a bit of a waiting period, and federal and local health officials will have access to a dashboard to see how many people are registered within each phase. The individual will also be able to log in and view the estimated time for their eligibility, which will provide them peace of mind. So eventually, county health officials will decide to move on to a new phase and push this update in the VAXS system. Everyone who is eligible will be notified and provided resources for scheduling an appointment, and hopefully this results in the individuals actually getting the vaccine. So at the point that the vaccine is administered, And with clear consent from the patient, providers will be able to mark the vaccination as complete. And federal and local officials will be able to view this in a dashboard and track progress of the rollout overall. Individuals will also be able to check their vaccine status, which is especially useful for vaccines that require multiple doses. So to try to demonstrate the power of access in the United States context, I'm going to talk about my experience as an individual with 2 high-risk conditions living in El Paso County, Colorado. And my case is perhaps a little bit more interesting because I could end up moving to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania before I'm able to get my vaccine here. So in El Paso County, I've registered separately with 6 different providers that will either notify me when I'm eligible in different ways, or I need to actually call in and occasionally check where I am on the list. I'm also having to periodically monitor 3 additional providers, as well as the El Paso County Public Health website, to see when I'm allowed to register there, or if additional providers come online. And because I don't know if and when I'll move to Pennsylvania, I've actually not yet registered there. And even though I can't register right now, I've kept tabs on the rollout, and I've found that the provider situation is very similar, where you actually need to register individually with each one. But if access were available right now, registering for a vaccine would be much more simple. So even though I live in El Paso County, I would register in the same single centralized location as everyone else in the United States. And I would have peace of mind that I'd be notified and connected to providers as soon as I'm eligible. And if I did, for some reason, end up back in Pennsylvania before I got my vaccine, all I'd have to do is log into Vaccess, update my county, and answer a few local registration questions, and I'd be good to go. So we've taken a look at how Vaccess would be deployed and operated within the United States, and hopefully I've demonstrated the power of Vaccess as someone who is seeking a vaccine myself.
Muted. Katina, how much time do we have left?
As much time as you need.
Oh boy.
Yes.
Okay. So I learned so much from Pooja about the context in India over the course of this project. And it's really helpful because the context of the United States and India are almost like opposites. They're very different, and developing a platform that can be used in both situations was important to us so that it could be scalable and customizable, like the others said. So in terms of feasibility, we thought about implementing Vaccess in 3 different ways. The first way is, what would happen if we didn't implement it? The pain points that were identified earlier would continue. So in the United States, we would continue to rely on fragmented and ad hoc solutions for registration. In Coconino County in Northern Arizona, they're using Eventbrite, which is a concert ticketing app to set up appointments to receive vaccines. And the problems of exclusion, long waiting times, and the inability to access vaccinations despite being eligible will continue. Additionally, in Coconino County, we heard that the vaccine helpline is understaffed and they're not able to take all of the calls that they're getting. And so they're in this feedback loop where they're constantly getting more calls and people are trying to get information and not hearing back. So in India, as Pooja said, the privacy concerns would just continue and amplify exponentially as more people join into the COWIN process. And the reason for that is because, as Pooja said, Aadhaar is requiring that you submit your fingerprints and iris scans to your national health ID in order for you to get a vaccine. So currently you have to do that if you want to get your dose. So if we were to consider doing something like a basic version of Vaccess, we would want to focus on the registration and the alert functions of the tool. And the way that this would work from the user's perspective is that they are giving their information to the local authorities and then possibly receiving an alert. So that's kind of like a one-way process. And the vaccine seeker in this situation, their primary relationship is just with their local authorities. So in the case of Jack's situation, he might be moving. This would be complicated because he has to create a new relationship with different local authorities. If we were to roll this out the way that we dream, this platform would be a national type of resource. So people would be able to use it no matter what their location is within like a country or a region. And another big feature that we were interested in setting up for the do everything stage is this type of data dashboard where instead of people calling or searching all over the internet trying to find information about when they can plan to get a dose, we wanted to include a dashboard which is showing supply chain information about vaccine accessibility as well as progress of people who have been vaccinated. And in that way, we can show them an estimated timeline and they'll know, okay, I just have to wait 3 weeks or I have to wait a month and a half. And instead of having to constantly think about it and have it in the back of their mind, they know that they can go to this portal and see the estimated timeline. And when it is time, they will receive the alert so that they can take action. So breaking this out into different aspects of feasibility, technically, this is a pretty basic kind of web tool that we would be developing. But despite that, we don't want to get too comfortable because we need to pay enough attention to the very sensitive information that we are working with, as well as making sure that people who are low tech have a way to be entered into the system. And this might look like having a call center where people can call and tell the operator what to enter into the different fields and figuring out a way to get them alerts at their regular telephone or a different way. As far as societal and operational, we intentionally designed this as a platform so that core features would be built in, but then there are optional ways to expand features depending on the locality's need, and local public health authorities would have the ability to make those choices. But because of this, we will need to coordinate with a lot of different public health administrators, as well as plan for training and support of the software in an ongoing fashion. In order for us to understand if this is even successful, we need to set up our feedback loops, which will help us track different metrics of success that we have identified, like how many administrators are we working with, how many people are registering for the alerts and things like that. But the reason why we want to look at these metrics is to make sure that our value commitments that Pooja identified, privacy and continuity of care, are being honored. And additionally, as Pooja said, we're incorporating privacy by design to help address the issues that are being seen in India. However, it's a very complex situation, and the current political environment and emphasis on technocracy are seen as barriers to having that work well in India. Economically, we did some research and these numbers are pretty interesting. So this article had identified in November of last year that the CDC allocated 200 million for local governments to plan their vaccine response efforts. In total, though, throughout this whole process, experts are estimating that we are going to need 8 billion in total, and this is just in the United States, of which 500 million would be used just for the technology and data system enhancements. And Pooja also gave us this figure for Cohen in India, The United Nations Development Program is spending approximately 3.4 million on implementation of that app. So we're spending a lot of money, and in all of this chaos, we're getting into inefficient patterns. And this is the, okay. Sorry guys, I have to go back to this. So, so upfront investment to develop Access would be pretty significant. This is a very large scale tool. However, the long-term savings from consolidating registration into one system will pay for the system itself, as well as cover the upfront costs and the ongoing maintenance. So the data dashboard I mentioned would obviously be kind of a separate cost and a separate feature, but this would accrue additional savings just through more efficient communication. There won't have to be as many personnel manning these call centers, having to respond to people and try to tell them when they can get a vaccine. So that will be a source of economic savings as well. So now, what are we going to do next with this idea? We know based on our research that building a toolkit like this seems useful and feasible and prudent when thinking ahead to future events which might need mass registration and tracking of basic data. We have built-in flexibility into the tool, so there could be situations that it might be applied to that we haven't even imagined yet. So what we need is seeking partnerships with subject matter experts as well as citizens with lived experience to kind of design this thing further and make sure that we're designing it in a way that is useful and maintains our values, as well as helping us to understand what directions the product might evolve into. So when we were researching similar models, we found two different paths that this could take. The vSafe application is created by the CDC, and so they're in total control of it. It's basically a thing where you can report your adverse reactions to the vaccinations, and they're able to track it and even reach out to you individually if they need to. So this is a centralized top-down kind of model. And the other one we have here is DHIS. This is kind of like an open source downloadable starter kit, which is created and hosted by the University of Oslo. And the way that this is different is because it's like GitHub. You can download some code and implement it. You can change it any way you want to. So this is a little bit more risky because we would not be able to maintain our privacy standards for different localities who might download this and change it as they see fit. So we are looking to, as I said, engage with subject matter experts to understand the pros and cons of these two models and figure out what is the best, most feasible direction to take. And now I'm gonna hand it off to Jason. He made a prototype.
I'll move through this quickly. I want to make sure we have time for questions, but this may give you some sense of how this might look. This is just getting a sense of the fact that you might come to this website. We have a quick overview of what this is all about, available in many, many different languages. We want this to be available to everyone. We want it to be really accessible as web technology. There's a little sense here at the beginning. This should take you about 4 to 6 minutes. Tapping through this, it's as basic of a form as it can be for allowing you to be uniquely identified as an individual person, but not necessarily tracked back to a centralized database or something like that. The vSafe app that we showed earlier, that we talked about a moment ago, has a similar kind of approach. It allows you to give the best way that you would like to be contacted, whether that's phone or text or email or a physical mailing at the point at which your vaccine is ready. We're kind of seeking the least common denominator of questions about very, very common COVID factors. Obviously, one county or state may have different guidelines for exactly how their rollout is going to work and the phasing, but there is some central information that is very common, for instance, comorbidities, how old you are, what your profession is, or the living environment that you live in. And so this would be seeking to gather that information. And then there's a section here, this is that layer on top where, Coconino County may have some specific question that you wouldn't run into elsewhere. And this is a spot where local authorities can kind of inject their own information that they need to seek. We talked about the possibility of optionally allowing you to provide, for instance, an ID verifying your identity. This could be used to speed things along when it comes time for your vaccination. But if we were to do something like this, we'd want to make sure that it was optional. You'll see that every page has a question of like, what is this for? Why am I about to do this? We want to make sure that as many people as possible can get through this comfortably. And then here's
Jason?
a review. Yeah.
I think your screen froze again.
Okay, can you, yeah, Jack, can you go ahead and share? Great. So we're seeking to gather as little information as possible to be able to get as many people as possible through this process comfortably. And you'll notice that every page has a little note. What is this data used for? What are we doing with this? Why are we asking for it? The top part of this form is basic information about who you are. And then Jack, if you can go to the next. And we're also asking for information about how you would like to be contacted, whether that's phone, text message, email address, physical mailing, at the point at which you are eligible and ready for a vaccine. Next screen. The COVID factors screen is attempting to gather the most basic, kind of least common denominator information about the factors that affect your vulnerability for COVID. Obviously, each state or each county is going to have different guidelines for how they're working out their prioritization and their phasing, but there is some body of information that is really common to most locations. Things like your age, how many people live in your home or your living situation, comorbidities that you may have. So if you go to the next slide, we can gather some of that information here. And then here's where we're injecting this local guidance. So say Coconino County has some specific question that it needs answered that isn't part of that least common denominator data. You can gather that information here. Go to the next slide. And then we also talked about optionally having an actual identification upload, a way to sort of validate that you are who you say you are and work through that, which could be used to streamline the process of getting your vaccination when it's time, as the federal government could maintain this information and pass along authentication basically to the county. But if we did this, we would want it to be optional, again, so that as many people as possible can use this tool with feeling comfortable with it. Go to the next. Finally, there's a review here, just showing all the information that you just told us. Make sure that everything looks good. You can go back and edit any part of it if you need. Next. And the very last step is we can perhaps already give you a little bit of a rough estimate of how long it may take you based on information you gave us. Depending on the state or locale, we may not be able to do that. And then go to the very bottom here. There's the option to set up an account to kind of lock this in and say that you want to continue if you want to be able to, for instance, access the dashboard later to keep tracking the vaccine. So our goal here is to get people in and out as quickly as possible and make it as convenient and comfortable for people as possible. So that just gives you an idea of what that experience might be like. We will now close and open up for any questions that you may have.